for the March meeting of the West Seneca Planning Board. Could we please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
In case of an emergency, you please exit through the rear door or the front, your front right door here, for in case of emergency or fire. Can I have the roll call, please?
Chairman Rathman,
Present.
Margaret Bebeck,
Present.
James Frick,
Present.
Dale McCabe,
Present.
Eric Saylor,
Present.
George Clifford,
Present.
and Ray Neluijek is absent.
Thank you.
Could
Could I have approval of the proofs of publication?
So moved. Seconded.
And the question? Motion approved. Could I have approval of the minutes of the 2020-2 meeting?
So moved. So moved.
And the question? Motion carried. We only have one item on the agenda tonight. That's under old business. The item is 2019-07, a request from Young Development Incorporated for a rezoning and special permit for property located at 945 Center Road, being part of lot number 204, changing its classification from R65A and R75 to R60AS for construction of 32 attached residential units for lease with attached garages. Motion to open the public hearing?
Seconded.
On the question? Motion carried.
Yes, good evening, Chairman and members of the Planning Board. Sean Hopkins of the law firm of Hopkins, Storgy and McCarthy. On behalf of the applicant, also with me is Pat Sheedy, the project engineer from Carmina Wood Morris. The last time there was any substantive discussion about this proposed project was during your meeting in early October. I'm going to quickly give an update of what's occurred since then, and then of course welcome any questions or input from the members of the board. The project as we originally presented it to you back in October did consist of 32 units. It's now been modified such that it consists of 30 units. We have 3 10-unit buildings. Each of those buildings will be 10 units each, and they do include attached garages. At the request of the planning board, particularly the former chairman, last year, we did submit a tree survey, we've submitted a wetland delineation, and we've done some extensive due diligence during those past couple of months. The site itself is approximately 3.83 acres in size. It's currently split zoned. It's zoned R65A and R75 pursuant to the town zoning map. We're asking that it be reclassified to R60AS, the S denoting a special use permit, as well as a special use permit. If you look at the R60A district in the zoning code, it does say that multifamily dwellings are permitted subject to the issuance of a special use permit by the town board. It's also important to note that where we're at in the approval process, this is a recommendation to the town board. If the town board ultimately does approve the request, we will then come back in front of you with fully engineered plans, an engineer's report, SWIP, et cetera, and the project will require site plan approval. That is the point in the process where we'll get into more technical questions, so I just want to make sure that's clear to those who are attending this evening. Each of the buildings will consist of upscale units. As I indicated, there are attached garages. The infrastructure to be installed in connection with the project will be privately held. One additional thing that changed since we originally presented this project back in October of last year is the original rear yard setback from the adjoining residential neighborhood was at 30 feet. That is the permitted setback per that zoning classification. We did move that building now such that the setback's approximately 53.95 feet. So we've nearly doubled the setback compared to what's actually required by the zoning code. We also have prepared an updated landscaping plan That's dated December 23rd. And basically what we're showing is some pretty intensive landscaping. We're showing 117 trees, various different types. That does include a staggered row of Norway spruce along the back of both 945 and 965 Center Road. Those trees will be 6 to 7 feet tall at the time of planting. We're also showing some clump blazed maples being installed near the patios on the rear portion of the site. Those trees will be approximately 8 to 10 feet at the time of installation. So we are trying to provide some extensive screening in a much larger than required setback at the rear of the property, in recognition of the fact that that adjoining use is single-family homes. We also have retained the services of Dr. Douglas Corelli of the UB Department of Anthropology, prepare a cultural resource survey, did all the intensive testing as required, and then on January 30th of this year, Jocelyn Ferguson of the New York State Office of Parks, Recreation, Historic Preservation issued a letter confirming that the project will not have any adverse impacts on protected cultural or historical resources, and I've provided each of the members with a copy of that letter. The second attachment that I provided you with is a copy of the current landscaping plan, again, that has been modified pretty extensively since the time of the original review. The second topic in terms of environmental impacts that I want to address is wetland impacts. So Earth Dimensions did conduct a wetland delineation of the site. That wetland delineation revealed the presence of a federal wetland with a size of 0.45 acres. That delineation was submitted to the United States Army Corps of Engineers, the agency that has jurisdiction with respect to federal wetlands. They issued a jurisdictional determination, and ultimately on January 30th, we did file a wetland permit application with the Army Corps of Engineers. We're proposing to impact 1/10 of 1 acre of the wetlands on the site, and that second handout, which I believe is actually, that's what I handed you, does show those areas highlighted in yellow, the minor wetland impact that's being proposed. The remaining 0.35 acres of federal wetlands will be preserved. So we have worked closely with Scott Livingston from Earth Dimensions in trying to minimize the wetland impacts. It's important to note that a wetland impact of 1/10 of an acre requires what's known as a nationwide permit from the United States Army Corps of Engineers. When you keep to such a low threshold, it doesn't require a consideration of mitigation. So we've deliberately designed this site to minimize those wetland impacts to the maximum extent practical. And then the next topic to address very quickly is in connection with the review for a special use permit for multifamily dwellings. The zoning code contains 4 criteria that ultimately the town board, based on your recommendation, needs to consider. So I'm going to walk through those really quick. And they're specified in section 120.23a of the zoning code. The first one is the location, size, use, nature, and intensity of the operations involved in or conducted in connection with the size of the site, the relation to it, and the location of the site with respect to streets, giving access thereto, shall be such that such use will be in harmony with the orderly development of the district in which it's located. As I indicated, we've tried to design this site in recognition of the fact that there's single-family homes behind us. That includes providing a greater than required rear yard setback, a staggered row of Norway spruce along the back property line, so we think we've met that criteria. The second criteria is kind of related and indicates screening or other protective measures shall be adequate to protect any adjacent properties in any R district from objectionable aspects of any such special use. So we think we've met that criteria with the landscape plan. It is important to note again, if and when we come back in front of you in connection with the future request for site plan approval, you will need to look at that landscaping plan and ultimately approve it. And the good thing about this particular board is you have considerable expertise in terms of landscaping. Criteria number 3 is adequacy of the number of off-street parking spaces. 30 units does require 60 spaces per the zoning code. We are showing 75 parking spaces on the site, so we have 15 more than is required by code. Generally speaking, we always want to have a little bit more than what's required by code to accommodate visitors, etc. So we have done that. And then the fourth criteria is really a catch-all criteria that simply says the town board does have the ability to impose reasonable conditions. That's something the town board will need to consider when they hold a future public hearing on this request. What we would ask you to consider this evening is making a recommendation to the town board in support of the requested special use permit and the reclassification of the land to R60A. If there's any questions about the changes we've made since October 10th of last year, the current plan, or the status of the review, either myself or Pat would welcome the opportunity to address them.
Do you have any questions from the board?
Not yet.
One question I had is, your wetland delineation shows one area of wetland, but your plan shows, well, actually 3 areas of wetlands.
Right, so it's a good question. So ultimately, Earth Dimensions, on a preliminary basis, thought there should be consideration of possibly 3 wetland areas. You can see those 2 that were much smaller, but ultimately the Army Corps of Engineers, again, the agency that has jurisdiction, only confirmed the existence of 1 wetland on the site, and that wetland has a size of 0.45 acres. Anyone who's worked with Earth Dimensions in the past knows they're fairly conservative, and they always want to disclose as much information as possible to the Army Corps of Engineers, but ultimately it was their determination that there is only 1 wetland with a size of 0.45 acres on the site.
I guess I would consider this spot zoning, since it's all zoned R75, the whole surrounding neighborhood.
Yeah, I guess again, ultimately that's up to you in terms of your recommendation. I would only note that, as you know, this is really phase 2 of the adjacent project, so it's kind of more of the same. So while I don't think it'd be fair to label it as spot zoning is generally thought of as a zoning classification that's not consistent with the surrounding area. You still need to make your recommendation based on what you deem appropriate. I don't think it's spot zoning. That doesn't mean because it's not spot zoning that automatically you need to believe that the rezoning has merit. We think it does, but ultimately that's your discretion.
Any other questions from the board?
Yeah, the prior project that was previously proposed and under construction had 2 6-unit buildings and 4 4-unit buildings.
Right.
Can you give me an estimate of what the square footage of the 4-unit buildings are and the 6-unit buildings? And then also what the square footage would be of these proposed 2-story buildings would be?
Mr. McCabe, you're talking footprint, right? Or square footage?
Square footage of the buildings.
Okay, Pat, could you come up with an estimate of that, looking at the plan over there? So it's a comparison of the existing buildings on the adjacent site to the proposed 2-story 10-unit buildings.
The proposed 10-unit buildings are smaller footprint-wise than the 6-unit buildings adjacent. As far as the square footage number, I don't have that off the top of my head.
Well, obviously, the square footage is gonna be twice the size of the footprint for the 2-story buildings.
Gross square footage.
Right, gross square footage.
Yeah.
So yeah, Mr. McCabe, if you actually look at the plan, which I know you have in front of you, while it sounds strange, the actual footprint of the 2-story buildings on this site is smaller than the footprints of the previously approved 6-unit buildings on the adjacent site.
But you indicated the gross square footage would be more, is that correct?
Right, because the.
2 stories,
Right,
yeah,
2 stories.
because it's 2
The
stories.
neighboring are single stories.
Absolutely.
I think the question's coming down to, we have 10 units in a smaller footprint, and compared to 6 units, it would, obviously the units in the new development are smaller than the ones in the current 6-unit development.
Well, not necessarily really smaller, they're 2-story. Remember, because on the 6-unit buildings, everything's on 1 story. So it doesn't mean that units are necessarily bigger, they're just all on 1 floor. And these particular buildings, the 10-unit buildings, I believe, have 2 1-bedroom units in them, is that correct, Pat? Whereas the previously approved project had no 1-bedroom units. So you do have a couple of different unit types and sizes in connection with these buildings. Generally, we're still talking about, upscale rents, I would envision, well, it hasn't been priced yet, a minimum of $1,200 a month and up. I mean, probably up to approximately $1,800 for rent for the end units.
Any other questions for the board? Okay, now we'll take questions from the public. Please identify yourself.
Good evening. My name is Jerry Miller. I live at 12 Sherwood Court in West Seneca here. It's adjacent to the existing project, or Phase 1 as Mr. Hopkins calls it. I'm here representing a coalition of neighbors. For the new board members, I have previously submitted a petition against this project, against the rezoning for a number of reasons. And again, just to go over those, we are concerned about the additional traffic, the additional sewage and stormwater. That existing area right now, we have pictures here tonight. I have video on my cell phone. If you didn't catch the WIVB newscast last fall about me kayaking down my street, you know, all of that is why we're concerned with the destruction of the clear cutting on the property that I don't think Mr. Young even owns yet. Is that correct, Mr. Hopkins?
That is correct, yes, under contract.
Okay, yes, I mean, Mr. Young is not even gonna purchase this property unless it's rezoned. So despite that, the 4 acres was clear cut. And again, last Halloween, if you were over in our area, you saw tremendous flooding that had taken place all along Center Road and in my area in Sherwood Court. And again, we don't think that adding additional drainage or additional strain on the infrastructure, the additional traffic that's gonna go in, anybody that lives here, if you're trying to get on the thruway at 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, you know what the backups are like. So we are against, more apartments in this primarily residential area, which has always been residential. And we see no need for the rezoning whatsoever. So, we in the neighborhood are against it. I have other people here that are gonna speak, but those are our real concerns. And, I love hearing Mr. Hopkins speak. He spends a hell of a story, but there's obviously a lot more to it. As went on. I mean, I for one am amazed that a firm like Earth Dimensions failed to note the presence of a wetland. When they did the original survey for Phase 1 of the project, that they failed to note that there was a wetland adjacent to it, and that magically it all got clear cut without anybody knowing. But anyways, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Pat Brady, 930 Center Road. And thank you for the opportunity to address you. I have some pictures of one of our last heavy rains that shows the flooding on Center Road. I think most of you have seen these before, but I don't think maybe Mr. Frick and Mr. Saylor have seen them. That's right across from the development that is, according to Mr. Hopkins, Phase 1. So Phase 1 went in where the VFW post was. In previous conversations about the first phase, there was conversation about the controlling of water, the management of water coming off of the property. And Mr. Hopkins, as I'm sure he will say, is they take care of all the water that goes onto their property. But what it doesn't do is address the amount of water that used to collect on the front of that VFW post property. In heavy rain, it became a reservoir of sorts. That no longer happens. If we allow this project to go forth at the property across the street from me, you're gonna see the same kind of water in that road that you see in those pictures. You'll see that all over that area out in front of my house, certainly. There are some people that built some really nice homes in our area. And they're gonna absorb a lot of that water. And it's gonna be in their basement, it's gonna be a mess. Beyond the water issue, it's a planning board. Let's plan something for our community. We don't need more apartments. We don't need more transient community. We need homes. If Mr. Hopkins' boss wanted to buy that property and build a couple of homes on it, I'd be all for it. But that's not the case. It's not a community. So let's plan something. I don't think this is right to change the designation of this property. I think the people that sat in this planning board 50 years ago or 60 years ago had it right. They saw it was wetland. They knew that they wanted to have single-family homes. They wanted to have a community. And that's the way that has sat for a long time. So now we have an opportunity to decide what really you want to do. So there are some new faces here. Great. I want to see it stay residential. That's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Jeff Osinski, also in Sherwood Court. Just want to make one point very clear as I begin my little presentation. Phase 2 of this project began Saturday morning at 8 o'clock in the morning on August 6th, when Young Development came in an illegally clear-cut this 4-acre site. For the next 3 weeks, the residents of this neighborhood were bombarded by the heavy equipment, by the grinding of tree stumps, illegally, without authorization from anyone. 3 weeks later, mysteriously, the night after the town board meeting, a stop work order was placed on that site. After it had been graded, after it had been reseeded by equipment by Young Development. So I really need to make sure that that is very clear. This was an illegal operation by the developer. Now, the town has a development plan, which you enacted just a few short years ago, with the input of stakeholders, town officials, community residents, who all came to meetings like this to discuss the future of our town. And one of the things they did during this analysis is they did something called the SWOT analysis. And for you people that don't understand developmentese, SWOT analysis is a process where the town hired a consultant to come in and assist the community members who are participating in this study to judge the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats to our town's future development. That's where you get SWOT from. So I'd like to just go through a few of the things that are contained in that still in effect development plan. Our strengths, the small town feel. West Seneca definitely has a small town feel. Our schools, our parks and creeks, our shopping opportunities, affordable housing. Our weaknesses, though, here's some very interesting things. The lack of a town center. Now, under the plan, the town center was envisioned to be the area right around here. Going up Center Road, that whole residential area was all seen within the plan to be developed as the town center, making it a more walkable, bikeable, enjoyable community area. One of the other weaknesses identified was a lack of identity and vision for the community. Think about that. What is this town? Everybody has a different definition of what this town is, but what is this town really? One of our weaknesses was disappearing green space. On August 6th, we began to lose another 4 acres by an illegal act by a developer. Another weakness is traffic issues and congestion. Under this development, we'll probably be putting another 100 cars between Site 1 and Site 2 into a residential neighborhood that is already has congestion issues on Center Road, on Union Road, and going into the 400. The community also identified that there were a number of opportunities. And the biggest one was create a town center where people could walk, where people could, go with their kids and ride bikes. And what have we got? We've got apartment units and a car wash. How is that affecting a town center? How is that creating a town center? One of our opportunities was the preservation of green space. Young Development just took that away from us and clear-cut that site illegally. Another opportunity is preserving community character through development opportunities. Jamming 52 units within a residential area does not create a community. It does not establish or help the community around it. All single-family homes. Some of these people have lived here for 50 years. Many of them will now have a 2-story edifice staring into their backyards under this plan. Whether it's 30 feet away or 50 feet away, it's still 2 stories looking into their backyards. And these are people that made this town. They're the people who made this town great. They also identified a couple more threats. And a lot of people have already talked about one of those was sewer improvements and expansion are needed for potential development.